Welcome to what should be the nerdiest video you're about to watch all week. But since you guys have been supporting me so much on my channel, I wanted to show you my biggest, darkest secret, which is definitely miniature wargaming. Now, before you ask, is an entire British tank division from World War II. Yes, it has gotten slightly out of control over the years, but hopefully my wife doesn't see this video, otherwise I won't be buying any more. But without further ado, let's jump in. What is a British tank division and what are the core components? Starting off in the centre, we have these two fantastic centerpieces of my collection, which are regiments or so many squadrons of British armour, which we call the teeth of the Armoured Division. And they're made up of a Firefly, which is basically a Sherman with a massive 90mm gun on the front of it, which would be able to penetrate most of the German heavy armour, or at least have a good go at it, because otherwise, without these longer powerful guns, the armoured part of the British Armoured Division would have no punching power, because the rest of each squadron, as you can see there's quite a few squadrons here with a command element, each squadron is made up of about 4 to 5 Shermans, sometimes 3, depending on how many losses they've taken in the battle. And by the way, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best attempt at coming close to what would be historically accurate, because I've looked online and everybody seems to suggest different numbers for different divisions, but the 11th Armoured seem to have 1 Firefly to 4 Shermans. There's 4 of those groups made up of 3 sections or squadrons each. So, Fireflies. Better armour on the front, but the side's relatively the same to a Sherman, because a Sherman M4 or M3 variant, depending on where you are in the war, had a puny 75mm gun on the front, which was incapable of destroying a German tank, such as our favourite evil villain, the Tiger I. I'm going to take a look at some of the tactics that were used by the Sherman commanders, the British commanders, and the Americans, by the way, to take down these beasts that were more than capable of one-shotting every single tank that you're about to see today. The British weren't particularly good at building their own vehicles. There were some elements that they got right and some elements they got very, very wrong. And you'll see the Americans have better heavy tanks in the war, that's the definite, and the British sort of have these slow infantry assault tanks called Churchills, which I have some over there. As you can see, I've run out of space, and so they resorted to tanks like the Firefly that could take them out at long distance accurately, and also an anti-tank element called an Achilles, which is an extremely light armoured tank but has a powerful gun on the front that was able to knock out Tigers and other Panthers or other German tanks with a one-shot kill, as long as it was an accurate shot and didn't bounce, which a lot of them did. You may have seen the movie Fury. Now Fury, the Americans are in similar tanks to these. In fact, some of them are exactly the same, but the Easy 8 is not on the table at the moment because that's an American exclusive. Sort of a little bit like the Firefly, it was the platoon leader. And those tanks were ambushed by a Tiger. As you see from the footage on the screen now, the Tiger takes a couple of them out, but the Americans, instead of sitting on the ridgeline getting shot one by one and taken out one by one, they charge at the Tiger, hoping to overwhelm it with numbers. And that was the tactic, really, that the British used, and other Sherman companies and squadrons used in the war. Here, they'd have a squadron of British tanks, I hope I'm saying that correctly, with a Firefly, maybe offering long-range distance support, hoping to get a good shot at this Tiger. But instead of just sitting on a ridgeline, they would instead advance, trying to cut the Tiger off, splitting its attention. You can see the Tiger now has to face one of 2 directions, this way or this way, and in the movie Fury you'll see the Tiger actually reverse up, trying to turn its turret in time to hit the last Sherman. But if these Shermans could just get around the rear of the Tiger, they could hit this exposed engine rack at the back. But even a side shot on a Tiger is pretty much impervious to a Sherman's puny 75mm gun. And it wasn't just the Shermans that would use these kind of tactics against Tigers, or heavily armoured German tanks, Americans used it as well, using tanks like the Wolverine to go around the flanks and outmaneuver the very slow and also unreliable Tiger tanks. Panthers were a little different because they're sort of a more medium mix, but most German tanks that were heavy and cumbersome were soon overwhelmed by the more numerous British tanks. Now, let's have a look at some of the models here, and we'll go into the other segments of the collection as we move on. This one here, which you can now see zoomed in on the screen, it's actually a resin build and a hybrid Sherman. You can see that by the curvature of the hull here. And this one, I think, is a Dragon kit, which is extremely expensive. One that I managed to get on a lucky day on eBay. But let me just show you something real quick, and you'll be able to understand why, as a 15 to 20-year-old, I could never afford to buy all these in the same beautiful standard of a Dragon Sherman. This is your classic Airfix M4. It has a plastic hull, a plastic interior. You can see everything's hollow, but it's what most people would have started out with. This or a Tiger 1. Tiger 1 was actually my first ever build. How much do you think an Airfix model tank goes for now on eBay compared to a Dragon? Painted, professionally built. Let's say these both are reasonably okay. I'll tell you, it's staggering. An Airfix maybe $1 to $2 to $3. Let's just be generous here. No one would pay more than that, especially for a unpainted one. If you had a painted one, maybe had a collection like this and you were selling 50 of them or 20 of them, maybe you could get a few more bob than that. But a Dragon one, these are collector's items. And these would go for around 20 to the 100 mark if they're professionally painted per tank. And so a lot of my collection here is actually taken from eBay, and I bought these in sort of mass job lot sales. And so you'll see some tanks like over here, the Crusader, which I can never afford to buy the upgraded Crusader, which is here, the Cromwell. And so you'll see that some of my collection is actually mixed and matched over the different parts of the war. But Sherman M4s, M3s, M4s kept their regular sort of build until the end of the war. You start to see different variants like the hybrid Sherman come in as well. That's the difference between model building nowadays. You have to build the Airfix kit yourself, you have to paint it, and it's fascinating that this model enthusiasm is starting to come back a little bit. Warhammer is obviously the big appeal to a lot of people, but I prefer the historical accuracy. Now, you may ask, have you ever played a wargaming? Yes, I have. In fact, I have a friend from the UK who has an entire American task force, not a division, a task force called Task Force Lovelady, and it's actually built to scale, everything down much better than mine, by the way. Mine is definitely a ragtag group of tanks, but his is actually built down so far that the radiator grills are all entirely accurate, and he'll take apart this tank and make it entirely accurate down to the tracked tread marks or the antenna or the gun mantle. And my collection is not quite that historically accurate, but it is definitely all I could afford at the time. And to be honest, it's not bad, is it? I have to say myself, seeing it out here probably for the first time in about 5 years, actually laying it all out, it looks quite impressive. But let's move on to a different part. Now down over here you're going to see my Reconnaissance section, built up of some Crusaders, some Cromwells, and some Wright Stuart Honeys. We've got 1, 2, 3, sort of 2 sections in a command section here, and we've got our Crusaders. And at the back is actually some of the more interesting parts of the Reconnaissance section. Let's have a look at those. Now these are called Humbers, or some of them are Daimias too, depending on which model I pick up. These have a beautiful shape and just design to them. I think they look absolutely incredible. And you can see just here the turret that moves around. I think some of it's back to front on this model. Let's have another look at another one. This one obviously being built for a desert combat scene, but you can see just the fun shape it's got. It's kind of an iconic tank reconnaissance vehicle with that gun on the front there. Pretty puny, not really used for tank-on-tank combat, but definitely one I would always wanted to get, and I've just got recently quite a lot of those at the back there. These are your Crusaders. These are what the British started out with in the North African campaign, deploying lots of these in large numbers against German units such as the Panzer III, but were completely outmatched by Panzer III gunnery and also armour. You see it's missing its front wheel there as well. There's different models of the Crusader. Some of them have bigger guns here, and as the tiers go up, the Crusader becomes more powerful, more competent, until it's replaced in Europe by these, which are Cromwell tanks. Very, very fast, light armoured tanks, but strangely, you'll notice here, have on the front of them a very, very strange turret front, which is completely square and flat. And when a shot hits that, it's not curved at all, like a Sherman's or other tank. You see it's curved quite a lot there. And what that does is, when a shot hits the gun mantle or the front of the turret here, it will go straight through because there's not any curvature, allowing the armour thickness to be significantly more. So that was the problem with the Cromwell, and you could literally see these guys burning all the time, especially when it comes up against like a Tiger or a Panther. Let's talk about painting for a second as well. This is a Stuart Honey, but I painted relatively recently. It's not particularly amazing, but you can see I've used sort of a brush technique to get these, it's called dry brushing, to get these contour lines on the side. And this is one I painted when I first started, and you can see it's not quite as good, I think you would agree. It's very, very flashy, and I used a gloss paint by accident. But I've always kept these until I repaint them, obviously, just to remind myself of where I started from, and obviously where I got. It's quite a distinctive difference. Moving on now to one of the more unique tanks that you may have seen floating around the Wargaming, gaming, World War II land, and this is a Sherman hybrid, I think it is, with a track, a mine clearer, a mine roller on the front of it. This is one of the coolest sets that I have. You can see here it's been painted immaculately, and also the rollers actually do roll, which I find really, really cool, and you can see it's actually joined there. And what they'd use this for is basically go before an infantry assault or a tank assault or an armour assault and clear the way for the rest of the tanks to push up, because German mines were very, very, very deadly. A lot of tanks getting hit, and you have to remember when the Allies were in Normandy for the second time, they had air superiority, so they could afford to have tanks like this be quite exposed going through the minefields. However, the Germans would be targeting them because obviously they're breaching a minefield, and so tanks like this were very, very exposed a lot of the time, and so Allied air cover would put down smoke screens. Sometimes they would just bombard an area before an assault came through, using a mine roller like this to clear the way for other vehicles. You can kind of see how tanks have evolved for the British over the years. We start out with the Crusader, which is their sort of first tank, proper medium tank, I should say. We had some other ones floating around, but they weren't quite as good. Then we had the Americans sort of come in and give us the design, or the British a design, for their Sherman tanks, and you had all these different variants come out. Then the British went on their own again and built some sort of thing which was very fast and good at recon, exactly what they built it for, but against enemy armour, not great. And then we go into this, which is the Comet, and you can kind of see modern tank influences start to come out. We've got this beautiful gun on the front, and it's sort of a extremely fast but decently armoured vehicle compared to the Cromwell. This is where the British really hit their stride, I think. You can kind of see that low turret there. See how it slopes back like that? That would be to deflect. As you can see from the Cromwell here, there's no deflection at all. It's very much a stuck it on, it'll work fine sort of approach, where this one, yeah, we're kind of thinking a bit more, aren't we? Gun mantle it. Very, very high armour is there, and that covers the sort of 70% of the front of that turret. So when you're hull down, and in this tank, you may have a lot better chances than if you were sticking out sort of like a sore thumb with a Cromwell like that. The British also had another tank, which isn't really talked about as much because it's very, very weird. Churchill. Now Churchills are kind of weird tanks because they do have a very similar front to a Cromwell. You can see it's not a particularly amazing model, this one. It's not got very much detail on the front there. But that's because all of this was basically thick armour. You can see these huge tracks here. Look at this massive track compared to a Cromwell or a Comet here. Kind of see the difference in what is going on here. And it's because this tank, the Churchill, was used actually as an infantry assault sort of tank. It's not really used for tank-on-tank combat. It's kind of like a Stug 3 or 4. Initially it was designed to be an assault gun. As you can see, these huge tracks are actually been put in place to go over trenches. It's kind of got that World War I-esque vehicle. You can kind of take off the turret here. We're kind of getting World War I feels. Imagine if this was a little bit higher. Yeah, it's definitely a World War I. But these things were completely slow bones. They were completely slow and very immobile, and so they could never really get into a good position, which is why they were used for infantry assaults. Having this down the street pointing at you, especially ones with flamethrowers or howitzers on them, would be incredibly useful for infantry to hide behind these huge overbearing tracks. Trying to penetrate one of these from the front is extremely difficult, even if you're an 88mm like a Tiger or a Panther. Churchills were the British response to a Tiger tank, but they were so slow and so overbearing, so massive a target for air power. They were only really used for infantry assaults. And you have things like the Comet and the Firefly kind of picking up the slack a little bit more, and the British never really got that far in developing a super heavy tank like the Germans did, the Tiger II or Tiger even you could say. They kind of stuck to a more of a, we're going to outmaneuver you, but we built this ridiculously stupid infantry assault vehicle, the Churchill, which was great for what it was designed to do, but if ever got into a gunfight with a Tiger, Panther, or any of these huge Jagdpanther tank destroyers or Jagdtigers, it was toast. It really was. And so the British kind of failing upwards again, if you would say, because obviously the Allies won the war, so they can't have been that wrong. Again, really not the best tank for the situation. Got stuck a lot, so it's very low power, so you're sort of moving at sort of really low speeds, whereas the Tiger tank could really pick it up, the Comet. They can kind of really pick up that speed a little bit more. British kind of missing out on that heavy tank to really challenge the Tiger II. That's where the Americans came in with the heavily armoured, super heavy Shermans that were kind of used to combat those tanks, but it was really the American tank destroyers that were really the Tiger's worst enemy, being super fast, super quick and super hard hitting, which is what those Achilles over there were also copying kind of design and also designed to do. Let's move on now to some of the other vehicles that the 11th Armoured would have had in their arsenal. Now you've heard of Russian motorised infantry, but the British motorised infantry was a different story altogether, and their opponents, the German half-track, were mostly used as infantry armoured personnel carriers, where you jump on a half-track, you'd ride to the front, the half-track would offer some support, but ultimately it was down to your squad to kind of be the killing blow. Now the British decided to do something completely different. They got these vehicles here, universal carriers, kind of a weird name, but the name itself describes exactly what it was for. It was a universal option. In other words, it was a multi-purpose vehicle, extremely small compared to a tank, but what they were used for was to carry small squads of elite British commandos or Marines or just sometimes regular motorised infantry to the front line, find a weak spot, maybe a German ammo depot, maybe even on a flank of a German assault, and they would deploy them. The universal carriers would then retreat and the squad would do the action. A lot of these carriers carried troops that had bazookas, carried troops that had Piats, and these were very much, you go in, you do your fighting, and then you come out straight away. There's no lingering. This is a one-hit action. Very quick on the wargaming table as well. Very effective if used correctly. Sort of like a shock cavalry in a total war game where you'd have it and then pull it straight out again. You wouldn't leave it in melee combat, and that's exactly what these would do. If the Germans would regroup and send reinforcements, they would easily crush this small, isolated British reconnaissance force. But if they were pulled out correctly and without too many casualties or problems with the vehicles. Then the British, you would use these as a very much hit and run tactics. And a lot of people get the wrong idea when they see this vehicle. It's very much an open top vehicle. It's not offering any sort of cover. It's very uncomfortable. It looks completely weird and wacky. Sometimes they had guns on them like this. You can see this gun here. Sometimes they had bazookas. Sometimes they even had flamethrowers, which was bizarre. Because, I mean, imagine this tiny little vehicle charging at you and having a flamethrower. Okay, that's kind of scary in itself. They had minimal armour that could stop machine gun bullets, not any heavy guns like 37 or 37mm from a German half-track even. So these guys were very, very exposed, but because of the light armour, they were able to move exceptionally quickly. And that's what this section here is all about, the motorised part of the infantry that would probably accompany an armoured division like this. In fact, a lot of them were motorised in trucks such as these, or half-tracks such as these over here, because they wanted to keep up with the advance of the armour. Having motorised sections of an armoured division allowed the armour to progress quickly and hit hard in decisive areas, and that's exactly what this whole division is built around. Manoeuvrability. You can't see any extremely heavy tanks here because there were none. In fact, it's the opposite. We've got long-range Firefly support, hard hitting power, and we have the Shermans here to really sort of overwhelm an enemy position. We have your recon force made up of lots of different kind of vehicles over here, including jeeps, including Humbers, including Damias, including Staghounds as well, which is American design, I believe. Again, used to rapidly penetrate enemy lines. Then you had your Achilles, as we mentioned before, long range, sort of one shot, then we're out, because this armour, my goodness, it's incredibly thin. And when you're facing something as bulky and powerful as a Jagdtiger, you don't want to get into that long-range engagement. This is not a staying power vehicle like a Jagdtiger would be entrenched and would fire and fire and fire until there were no enemies left in front of him and rely on other tanks to cover the flank. This was more of a run and gun kind of tank. And you can see just the difference between this tank and a Sherman. I mean, it's completely outmatched in a one-on-one. That's why they deployed so many of them. Let's move to the last part of our division over here. This is the artillery section. As you can see, it's got some relatively out of scale guns for some of them. Obviously, I didn't manage to get all of them the same scale. Some of them, however, are relatively well painted and done, especially these ones here. Artillery, again, more of a supporting weapon for an armoured division. I kind of have them just because they probably had artillery in some capacity depending on when you looked at the war, but they were very much a supporting element. And it could be said, definitely the hardest to acquire from a wargame perspective is the half-tracks. Come over and have a look with me. These here are the crack British infantry assault vehicles, also known as the M3 here, the M4 half-tracks. You can see some of them here, like this one, are equipped with 50 cals. This is probably not entirely historically accurate, but a 50 cal, was that? No? Yeah, it's a 50 cal. You can see the rivets there. And some of them, they're sort of a multi-purpose vehicle. Some of them are equipped with mortars. So in a war game, you'd ride up to an enemy position, maybe over or behind a hill, send your forward observer forward, and you're able to use these half-tracks as sort of mobile mortars. And if your enemy counter-attacked, you're able to pull back effectively. Some of them, these have become my sort of semi-favourites, or they're kind of more for the bizarre nature of them. They had these 20 mils in the back, 20 mils in the back, you can see here. And they were used obviously to defend motorised companies from the aircraft that the Germans would use, although they were particularly good against massed infantry or to drive infantry out of strong positions, or even offer suppressing fire whilst the rest of your company or platoon pushed up, because of the incredible fire rate and devastation that these guns would have had. So again, multi-purpose role. So that's it. That's the British 11th Armoured Division, sort of semi to scale, I'd hope. Definitely these two parts of it, which are the teeth, which I'm especially proud of, and we've got these supporting elements, the reconnaissance, the anti-tank, the light companies, the jeeps, the artillery, the reconnaissance, universal carriers, the M3, M4 half-tracks and the old lumbering Bedfords. That's your British Armoured Division. If you really enjoy this video, I also have a German Armoured Division, you could say, made up of mostly Stug 3s and some 4s, but also including a Tiger heavy element and a Panther heavy element, along with some other sneaky Jagd Tigers and Jagd Panthers, and a lot of German half-tracks. I hope you've enjoyed. This has been my little go-to hobby for the last 15 years, and I wanted to share it with you. I know it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's definitely mine, as you can probably say, and I'm definitely not allowed to buy any more now because the wife is probably watching. So take care.